Greetings and welcome to the Atlantic Council's Central Europe Week Conference. This is taking place this week in Prague, in Bratislava, in Warsaw, and it is a series of events and conversations between us, the Atlantic Council, and our friends in Central Europe. This ought to be a retrospective about how well things went after 1989. But we can't sit back and look back with pride at the past only because there's a war going on in Ukraine. And what is happening in Ukraine is a continuation of the issues which got rolling in 1989, and I'll put it this way. Do we believe in a Europe whole, free, and at peace? The Slovaks, the Czechs, the Poles, the Hungarians in better days, the Baltics took down the Iron Curtain and were, with the United States and a lot of West Europeans, co-authors of Europe whole, free, and at peace. And it became a reality for much of Europe with NATO and EU accession for Slovakia. The Ukrainians are fighting that same fight, and Putin wants to restore the empire. And you don't need any American to tell you this. He has made the claim. He, Medvedev, others, daily remind us that the people in this part of the world were right about Russia, and many people in Western Europe and the United States were wrong. And this has been unfortunately demonstrated. Now, the goal of Central Europe Week is to bring together Americans and Central Europeans to look at the present challenges and the future. And that's the context of the war in Ukraine shapes what we're doing. We're partnering with GlobeSec, and they are one of the premier, just one of the best think tanks in this part of the world. And my thanks to GlobeSec in general, and specifically for hosting French President Macron when he gave a speech where he acknowledged that the Central Europeans were right and the French were wrong. That was a great speech and a serious one. We're also partnering with the U.S. Embassy in Bratislava, and Ambassador Gautam Rana, my colleague from my days at the State Department, is here, and let me tell you, Slovakia is lucky to have him. The right person at the right time. The theme of today is economic security and resilience in Central Europe, and the unspoken subtitle is, what are our challenges now that Russia's putting on the pressure? Right? Energy. I remember when it was an article of faith in Berlin that Russia would never use energy as a weapon. Right. The Germans are adjusting to the fact that Russia is using energy as a weapon and will continue to. Again, the Poles, Slovaks, Czechs would nod and say, yeah, we told you. And they're right. We have our challenges. A second challenge is that the US and the EU need to get their trade policy right. And we're trying to do stuff that is hard. Things like friend shoring or de-risking with China. What does that mean when you try to put that into practice? So there are a lot of tough issues we're dealing with. In any event, I'm not supposed to give a speech. I'm just supposed to set things up, and I have fulfilled that responsibility, and it is my pleasure to welcome GlobeSec's leader, Robert Vos, to the podium for the next phase of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. And welcome to GlobeSec. It's great to see so many familiar faces from here, but also our US friends. We are very proud to partner with the Atlantic Council. Actually, This partnership between GLOBSEC and Atlantic Council is almost 2 decades long. I remember, I'm with GLOBSEC almost 2 decades, and I remember when we were establishing GLOBSEC as a tiny, small organization that was run by students. We received so much support from the Atlantic Council of the United States, and thanks to that vital partnership we have for 2 decades, we have been able to develop to a true beacon of transatlantic affairs here in Central Europe that we are very proud of. We are also super excited to have Dan with us, because Dan is not only a good friend to GLOBSEC, he is a big friend to Central Europe and a great supporter of Central Europe's place in the world and in a transatlantic relationship. Between his courage, his wisdom and his endurance, I think that the enlargement of NATO back then would not be possible. I think the idea Europe whole, free and at peace would not be possible without people like Dan, who championed and went against the winds to make it happen. And it was not easy. It was not easy, and we need more people like Dan Fried. Dan, thank you for being our friend for such a long time. I also thank Ambassador Rana for supporting this event and partnering with us on this. GLOBSEC has just recently also opened a small office in Washington, where we want to also promote the transatlantic relationship. And I think this mission has never been more important than after what we've seen more than a year ago in our neighboring country, in Ukraine, when Russia attacked. It was an unprovoked attack against the neighboring country. So today's discussion the title is Economic Security and Resilience in Central Europe, laying the foundations for transatlantic dynamism. We've been long talking about resilience and economic security, and it seems like a cliche. But this word has gotten a new meaning after 24th of February, because we need to really be resilient, and we need to build our economic foundation on a more secure and resilient basis. Because what Russia did, it was not only an attack on a neighboring country, it was a frontal attack on the very basic principles of European security. And actually what Vladimir Putin said a few weeks ago in his speech, I would consider as a declaration of a war against the rule-based order. Because he said he wants to, his goal is to change the world order. He wants to change it. So what we need to do is to defend, not only to defend the principles of international order, but how we perform in this conflict will affect the future of our institutions and the trust in these institutions and the very basic principles that our world is being founded on. And what we are seeing in Ukraine is just the tip of the iceberg, because there are several front lines of this war. We see the physical front line in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are paying the highest possible price for what we have taken for granted in the last 2 decades, security, freedom. They are paying with their blood for what we taken for granted. But there are another 3 front lines of the same war. The second front line is inside of our societies, in the information space, where Vladimir Putin is using the information space on in our home countries to politically alter the political leaderships. He is also using another front line, which is energy, against us. And economy is the next front line of the same war that he's trying to combat with us. So to win in Ukraine, paradoxically, we need to win at home. We need to win economically, we need to win against disinformations, and we need to win to be more secure in the energy space. And it is clear that we cannot achieve it alone. We cannot achieve it as individual countries. We cannot achieve it only as Europe. That's why the transatlantic partnership and the transatlantic cooperation has never been more important than now. Because what we do now and how we perform here together will define our security and our freedom and our peace for the next decades. So with that, I'm glad that we have an excellent group here in the audience, but also online. And I'm looking forward for today's discussions. Once again, thank you very much. Ambassador Rama, please, the floor is yours.
Dobry dzień, and good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here today, and I'd like to begin by extending a warm welcome to everyone here in Bratislava and all those joining us virtually from around the world. Thank you to Ambassador Dan Fried and distinguished colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs and the Ministry of Finance for being here today. Thank you to GlobeSec for hosting us and to the Atlantic Council for bringing us together this week to discuss critical issues facing Central Europe and the broader implications for transatlantic cooperation and global stability. We know that a stable and strong transatlantic alliance matters now more than ever. Let me begin by offering a personal anecdote. I'm here today as the U.S. Ambassador to Slovakia because of Ambassador Dan Fried. When I first joined the State Department 21 years ago, I quickly became, in the parlance of the State Department, a Middle East and South Asia hand. I went to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. I was serving as the Egypt and Syria desk officer when Ambassador Fried recruited me to work for him as a special assistant. That decision changed the course of my career. I had a small office next to his, no windows, and learned at the feet of one of America's finest diplomats. And though in the ensuing years I continued to work on issues across the globe, there's a straight line between the day that Ambassador Fried offered me that job and my presence here today. So thank you, Ambassador Fried. And for those of you who don't think I'm doing a good job, blame him. Central Europe finds itself once again on the front lines of global conflict following Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine. President Biden has made clear the United States' unwavering support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's ongoing war of aggression. Democratic Ukraine stands to fight, defend its people and its future and fulfill its aspiration to join the transatlantic community is emblematic of the principles we all share: democracy, freedom, respect for sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity. Our continued support for Ukraine is a testament to the strength of our transatlantic ties, while the ongoing conflict underscores the need for continued unity. Similarly, the United States today supports Israel's right to defend itself against the inhumane brutality of Hamas. As Secretary Blinken noted yesterday, the United States' efforts include the need to significantly expand humanitarian assistance to people in need, prevent the conflict from spreading to other parts of the region, and setting the conditions for a durable, sustainable, lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. The focus of this important conference is on another critical issue: economic security and resilience in Central Europe. The United States recognizes the vital importance of fostering economic security and resilience in this region as a cornerstone for enhancing the transatlantic relationship. We are committed to supporting the economic development of Central European nations, including, of course, Slovakia. A strong and resilient Central Europe is key to a more secure and prosperous transatlantic community, promoting democratic values, trade, and economic cooperation, all of which are essential for the collective well-being of the United States and our European partners. The U.S.-Slovakia bilateral relationship celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. The deepening of our relationship with Slovakia over the past 3 decades serves as a testament to our shared values and the ties that bind us. Slovakia is not only a trusted NATO ally, but an important economic partner. Our relationship with Slovakia is built on shared values, including a commitment to democratic principles, rule of law, and human rights. As a member of the European Union, Slovakia plays a crucial role in fostering regional security and integration. I am proud of our work to strengthen economic ties between the United States and Slovakia, enhancing the economic security and resilience of Central Europe as a whole. In recent years, the United States and Slovakia have deepened our economic cooperation to advance zero and low-emission energy solutions, and private companies are playing key roles. This extends from support services, such as a company developing cutting-edge drilling technologies to tap into deep geothermal sources, to finished fuel for Slovakia's fleet of nuclear reactors. The recent agreement between Slovakia's nuclear power plant operator, Slovenská elektrárňa, and Westinghouse Electric Company to license and supply nuclear fuel assemblies will help diversify Slovakia's nuclear fuel supply. This agreement will contribute to regional stability and energy independence, making it a crucial step towards a resilient and secure energy future. We are also excited about our are about our bilateral civil nuclear cooperation. The Department of State selected and will support Slovakia's proposal to explore converting coal power plants to innovative small modular nuclear reactors as part of the Project Phoenix program. I'm very excited to say that the launch of Project Phoenix is happening this week, and we have high-level support from the Slovak government and from the U.S. government to make this happen. Central Europe's dependence on energy imports has often made it vulnerable to external pressure. Slovakia has admirably diversified its natural gas supply since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, finding new suppliers, using new routes, and completing its gas interconnector with Poland, which offers a new north-south option and access to additional LNG terminals upon completion. Investments in diverse energy sources, diverse transit routes, and renewable energy are investments in economic and national security. The United States will continue to collaborate with Slovakia and the countries of Central and Eastern Europe to enhance energy independence and security and move the region away from dependence on Russian gas. Central Europe is at the heart of the Transatlantic Alliance, and the United States is committed to our partners in this region. We will work with you to strengthen your economic security, and you can be confident of our continued support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's aggression. Our enduring partnership with partners like Slovakia exemplifies the strength of our transatlantic balance. Our collective efforts will ensure a prosperous, secure, and resilient Central Europe, which in turn contributes to the strength and vitality of the transatlantic community. I look forward to working with all of you to achieve this vision. Thank you, Ambassador Fried. Thank you, Robert Vach. I wish you all fruitful discussions through the remainder of the Atlantic Council Central Europe Week.
Welcome to the audience that visited us in the premises of the GlobSec, and also to the audience watching us via live stream. A bit of the household instructions to begin with, especially for our virtual audience through the live stream. There is a web page, there is a service called AskAC, askac.org, askatlanticcouncil.org, where you can ask the questions for our panelists. And to discuss the economic security and resilience in Central Europe and how we are prepared for that, I'm honored to be joined by our highly distinguished panel of colleagues. First, Dr. Martina Slabejová, if I may ask. Martina Slabejová is Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Slovakia, one of the most active, and I dare to say the most influential business public policy advocacy groups that we have here in Bratislava. She previously served briefly in public service as Director General at the Ministry of Investments and Regional Development, where she was responsible for the Informatics Society. But before that, she had 17 years of distinguished career working for the Microsoft in Central and Eastern Europe. So welcome. Sonia Mužikárová. Sonia is a former advisor to the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She's also fellow of the Bretton Woods 2.0 and fellow of the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. She previously had a distinguished career at the ECB, where she was analyzing and forecasting the non-euro area member countries. She also worked for OECD in Paris, where she was leading the ministerial chairmanship of Slovakia in 2019, and she actually established the economics research here at GlobSec, for which we thank her. So welcome back, Sonia. And last but not least, Jeffrey Lightfoot. Jeffrey is a program director for Europe at the Center for International Private Enterprise, and also a fellow at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security of the Atlantic Council. He previously worked for Jones Group International Consultancy, as well as in-house in the Atlantic Council, where he worked up to the position of the Deputy Director of the Scowcroft Center for international security. So again, thank you for joining us, and without undue delay, I would like to table the first question, which follows what Ambassadors Fried and Rana have mentioned, weaponization of the energy, something that we have seen. Robert Vash has mentioned that we need to fight this war also domestically, and I dare to say that the most significant shockwave for every single household, at least in Slovakia, didn't come immediately in February 2022. There we had concerns, would there be enough gas? In the summer, August of 22, there was this spike in the prices of gas and subsequently also in the electricity, and all of a sudden, pretty much every single household was concerned about the price of that energy. And then we understood what is being meant by the weaponization of energy. So my question to Sonia and Ms. Slabs and Martina and Jeff would be, what were the impacts of that shockwave, of unpreparedness for this weaponization, for the households, for the companies, and are we better prepared this time as the winter is coming? Sonia.
Well, thank you very much, Vlado, for the introduction, and thank you to both GlobSec and the Atlantic Council for having us. It's a real pleasure to be here. So to your question, I think, and it has been stated already several times, energy security lies at the heart of economic resilience, especially in this region of Central and Eastern Europe, which has boasted an extraordinary dependency, which is also a legacy of its, post-Soviet heritage, on Russian energy commodities. And what has happened is that the invasion has turned something that has been a slow burn policy dossier, an agenda, into a very prominent issue that all of the governments scrambled to respond to with various policies. And the stakes were extremely high for countries like Slovakia in 2022, as you have alluded to, especially on the gas front. I think the EU came together nicely as well, on top of national responses with the gas storage recommendations, the reductions in voluntary demand, solidarity arrangements with contingency plannings, things like that. But also there was some, we should not forget that there were some circumstances beyond the control of governments and the European Union measures. And we were also quite lucky because of the warm winter weather. And things like, demand in global markets, the fact that Chinese demand was lower. So it was a mixture of circumstances, but maybe it's worth it to take stock of where we are currently. And I think the punchline is that the dependency was extraordinary. The progress is also remarkable. But there also are some large disparities even within the Central European region. So in general, I would say Poland and Czechia has done a bit more progress in diversification efforts than Slovakia and Hungary has. Poland has been well ahead of the curve because it has opened its LNG unit in the Baltic coast already in 2016 and is now receiving shipments from Qatar and the US under long-term contracts, but also using the spot markets as well. And its share in total gas imports has increased from 24% in 2021 to 43% in 2022. So this is remarkable. Czechia has also reduced its dependence on Russian gas from 97% to near zero. So this is also quite compelling, pivoting towards mostly Norwegian gas that's transported through the German pipelines and also shipments of LNG through ports in Belgium and the Netherlands. Based on some recent data that I have caught, Slovakia last year was still importing some large chunk of its gas supplies from Russia. I think it was above 50%. But it has started massive diversification talks and efforts also with Lithuania, but also with Italian and German companies. And it has also signed a memorandum of understanding with Poland via its new interconnector. And as for Hungary, I think the diversification efforts are tied to its political leadership and to its foreign policy orientation. So the progress here remains limited, and the country is still importing a large chunk of natural gas from Russia. And then we have heard some progress that has also been done on nuclear, which is really important because the Visegrad economies harbor a large industrial base, which is very energy intensive, and they have opted to bet on nuclear to a large extent to fuel this base. I think what really remains to be done is the progress on the green transition, in particular with regards to energy efficiency of buildings, of green mobility, and general use of renewables. I think this is homework that we still have quite a bit to do on, but maybe I'll pass the floor to my colleagues here.
Thank you very much. There was a good point that really in Berlin, the Christmas last year were 15% warmer than the average for the long period of time. I think the Austrian statistics, which is collected for almost 200 years, was the warmest on the record. But speaking of industrial base and speaking of the impact of this weaponization of the energy, what's the view of the business?
Yeah, the American Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the GlobeSec and the Atlantic Council. American Chamber of Commerce here representing 300 companies, almost 300 companies. 1/3 of the companies is based in the US. And of course, taking the point of the today discussion, economic security and resilience, I would like to point, and it was great to hear from the ambassador that Central Europe is in the heart of the US relationship. That's very important to hear. And also I would like to quote probably my good friend Robert Vash. He mentioned in one of his articles that it's better to stay for the Central and Eastern Europe, it's better to stay with the strong Ukraine than with the Russian Ukraine. And we understand what he meant by these words, by this article, Robert. And thinking about the topic of today, about the security and resilience, if you think that the security, I would say, passed 4 or 5 years. It started with the pandemic, when we somehow lost the healthcare security, big way. And also it continued with the war, but also it's connected to the other implication related to the economics, inflation locally here, and struggling and disruption of the businesses, not just in Slovakia, but in all region. And plus also it's connected to the climate changes, which was already mentioned, which probably helped us in this winter, but the question is how the situation will be progressed in the future. So all this, I would call it as a loss of the security during the past year for businesses, but for every citizen, for every human, not just in the Central and Eastern Europe, but in all global. And not commenting the situation, what's happening now with the Israel and the Hamas conflict. Now, in these aspects, the resilience is absolutely important for all of us. And of course, we can talk about the political type of the resilience, how important it is for us now to stay with the NATO and to be supportive, and how important it is for us now to probably to talk more into the countries in the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. How important it is to think about the building infrastructure, not just from the east to west, but also from the north to south, and all those aspects. And how important it is for the Europe to have very good and strong relationship with the US in this matter. And here I would like to point on a very important report, which I taking with me. It's very heavy, I have to say, but the topic is heavy. So the Transatlantic Economy 2023, which is produced by the US Chamber of Commerce and American and European Chamber of Commerce. And here I would like to point a few important data. The transatlantic economy is providing the remarkably resilient in the face of the global economic and strategic disruption. The US and Europe remain each other's most important market and geo-economic base. The 7.1 trillion transatlantic economy in 2022 employs 16 million of the people on both sides of the Atlantic. It is the largest and wealthiest market in the world, accounting for half of the global personal consumption and close to 1/3 of the world GDP in terms of the purchasing power. And those are very important data, I believe. In 2022 was recorded breaking on the multiple fronts. EU, US and Europe trade in goods reached in all-time high 1.2 trillions US dollars. US and Europe goods trade hit a record of 909 billion, more than EU and China goods trade, and 25% higher than US-China goods trades. US companies affiliates in Europe earned an estimated 325 billion, a record high, while European affiliates in the US earned 151 billion, the second highest level ever. US exports of liquefied natural gas to Europe hit their highest level ever. The US accounted more than half of European LNG import, and Europe accounted for more than half of US LNG export to the world. The last data, investment, 64% of the global investment into the US comes from Europe, 61% of the US global investment goes to the Europe. That's the one side of the coin. Of course, like we can later spoke about how the European economies are doing in terms of the businesses compared to the, for example, the particular states of the US, where we are not so good looking into the Europe, but we will have time to talk to it later. Probably what is also interesting about this publication is that you can find how each country of the European Union is doing in terms of the import-export, not just the goods, but also the services. So it's interesting reading. And I bring some papers here with me, so my colleague Peter Rusiniak, who is now with me in the room, will share with those who will have interest for those data. And publication is free on the web as well. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I hope that after the dust settles, we will revisit the topic that we have been discussing before COVID, which is TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. But back to Bratislava, I forgot to mention that Center for International Private Enterprise, its European program is being run from Bratislava, of which we are very honored. Therefore, I would like to, Jeff, you to start with a question: how do you assess the response of Central European governments to the economic disruption that was brought about by this weaponization of the energy over the past almost 2 years?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. We are really honored to be here, and I've got family here, right, so who have got long-standing linkages to GlobeSec, right, going back a long time. So I feel like my world is coming full circle here, being at GlobeSec in Slovakia with friends from DC at an Atlantic Council event. And I do get the fortune to travel quite a bit around this region and see how this has worked out, the perspectives from across the region, which are fascinating. I mean, I do hope we can talk about this. This is Central Europe Week. You reference this, Ambassador Fried, and there's no programming going on in Budapest, which is taking a fundamentally different approach to economic security, to energy security, to the relationship with China, to de-risking. And I remember sitting in Washington in 2014 after the Russians had taken Crimea and having the Lithuanian Minister of Energy come, and they were talking about the Klaipėda LNG terminal, and they were like, we know what Russia looks like. We're going to tell you what they look like. We know from hard experience, we are putting our eggs in the basket of energy security and independence. We're going to get our gas from LNG. We're going to have leverage with the Russians. So we're not taking this risk again. And the Poles have been talking about LNG terminals, right? Svianutze, if I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. But they had started to take proactive measures. They, of course, had coastline, which is different when you're a landlocked country. And when I was with General Jones at the Atlantic Council trying to get the 3 Cs initiative concept going, and we would go meet with the Obama administration, and they were like, that sounds like a big abstract concept. What we're really focused on is energy interconnectors between some of these Central European countries, from Slovakia to Ukraine. It's that kind of hard, patient diplomatic work that you both do every day to get the sort of resiliency to be able to de-risk, right? They weren't talking about decoupling, but to not allow the Russians to necessarily hold the continent hostage as they had done in previous gas crises. And so that's just that kind of blocking and tackling where you saw some countries that recognized the risk of this long before, others that were comfortable to just sort of let the situation play out. And I'd point to the Germans here. I remember being in conversations with high-level German officials, and they would say, it's unfathomable that we could live without Russian gas, but what would our industry do? And what would we do without Nord Stream, right? And then I was just with some of those high-level same German officials this year, and they were kind of spiking the football, to use an American term, about how they managed to get through this transition. Yes, industrial production is down some in Germany. It hasn't been easy. The IRA hasn't made their life any easier, but they've gotten through it. And we didn't talk about the question of subsidies, which I know in the debate we had, that I know you were part of, about the pre-election outlook, we talked a little about the amount of money that's been spent at the European level to support industry, to support households. So I think it will be interesting to reconvene here at Central Europe Week 2025, 2026, and see how the public coffers look and how we've gotten through this. But I'm generally impressed, but I'm most impressed with those countries that started to take the difficult steps a few years ago that find themselves in a much better position than today.
Very good observation, but basically, Sonia has started with that point about Poland moving quick enough. If I remember right, actually, Poland sent a notice to this deal, to this supply a deal with Gazprom already before the attack. So they just terminated that deal due to contractual conditions. But looking at the policy recommendations or policy lessons that we could have learned from this different response of Central European government, question to Sonia, Jeff, and also Martina, what are the lessons? How with the benefit of hindsight, how could we advise the upcoming governments to approach the whole topic of the energy security or economic resilience in this changed world, which will be, even after the war will end, there will be again the pressure, and there is already now the political pressure. The Ambassador Rana has mentioned that we successfully diversify also in nuclear fuel to Westinghouse, but nevertheless the political forces are there that will be pushing us towards cheap stuff from the East. Sonia, if you want to start on that. Policy lessons or recommendations.
Yeah, well, I think the leading lesson from, and you have alluded to it in relation to Poland and perhaps also the Baltic states, the leading lesson is here that it pays off to be preemptive. So to think ahead, to have a long-term strategy, to have milestones and follow them before basically a shock like Russian invasion has hit. It has been said, no one expected that, well, not no one, but many Western economies wouldn't believe that Russian energy commodities would be weaponized towards the West to the extent that they have. And yet it happened. So I think just thinking long-term in terms of both physical security and economic security pays off. And I think we have seen it. It's been a case in point. And we have to approach economic policy planning in a more strategic way in general. And that goes for Central Europe, and I think that goes for Europe in general, and we see signs of this in terms of, de-risking strategies, the strategic sovereignty of the European Union, the CHIPS Act, things like this. We see it already happening, but I think the issue is these are highly divisive issues in, a union like the European Union when you have 27 members and you have basically national sovereign accounts of how these various policy dossiers should look like. So it's a bit tougher in terms of reaching consensus and converging on the timelines.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, the policy recommendations based on what we have.
Yeah, I would say hope is not a strategy. So wishful thinking is not going to cut it. And I think there was a lot of wishful thinking, right?
You follow the whole region.
Yeah.
So why has been it's always perceived that the Hungarians or Poles are this close strategic allies, at least until the recent elections in Poland. Why have been their strategies with regards to this energy security so divergent? And what we can learn from that.
And I do want to come back to your first question. I wouldn't posit myself as an energy security expert, but of course they have different geography, right? So Poland's got a nice big coastline to build LNG terminals. If you talk to, we've got partners in Hungary who are, I would say, independent from the government, right? Not there to toe the line. And they'll say, look, this is very difficult. Our refineries are fitted out for crude oil that comes through pipelines from the Urals. So that takes time. You can't make those switches very, very quickly. But there's also clearly a very conscious political choice. It benefits industry, right? The cheap energy from Russia worked really well for a lot of countries for a long time. So there's a conscious economic choice. And there's clearly a conscious political choice from the Hungarians to stay close to the Russians. I'm not sure I fully understand their strategy because it seems to be getting more and more, turning more and more towards autocratic regimes every day if you follow the accounts of the people around Orban. But back to your earlier point, so hope is not a strategy. Businesses need data. This is one of the experience we find on all these economic security questions. We're all flying blind. So when we have conversations with business associations and chambers in Central and Eastern Europe, which were trying to facilitate business discussions on these issues, they say, where's the data? Is investment screening going to destroy the FDI climate here in Central Europe, which is, FDI is fundamental for these countries, right? We don't actually know because the investment screening mechanisms are 2 and 3 years old. Then we had COVID, right? Then we have the energy price spike. Then we have IRA. So how do you disaggregate those data points and know? So business associations and chambers are flying in the blind. They're kind of blind on this. That's the first thing. Know your vulnerabilities, know your weaknesses, and have the best data that you can get. And I think this is where I see my colleague Maciej Szymalczyk out here from the Central European Institute for Asian Studies trying to map out the indirect demand exposure risks. The Slovak trade with China is not the only story. It's also Slovak value chains through Germany that then go to China. So there's actually more exposure in Slovakia and Czech Republic to China than we really realize. So have that kind of data, be aware of the points of risk, and then have some sort of trusted public-private dialogue on this where government's willing to share some of the information that they have about the risks and the vulnerabilities, and business can talk to government in a way that they trust that all their vulnerabilities aren't going to be spilled out into the open for competitors to take advantage of. These are the three things that we see are necessary for there to be some sort of productive business partnership with government on the economic security agenda. I think there's a lot of lessons there that can be learned from the energy side, but probably also in other contexts as well.
Martina, the AmCham was one of those important stakeholders in negotiations about all these corrective or rectifying measures during the energy crisis. So what would be the policy recommendation or lesson from these past 2 years when it comes to the energy security and resilience from the view of the business?
Again, like I will not comment just the energy resilience and security. I will take it more global. And I will point to the Slovakia situation. We are in the European Union, and there is a lot of legislation and regulation which we need to adapt. Somehow, Slovakia is successful to make it probably more complicated than it's necessary. One of the example is the direct investment legislation. While in the Czech Republic, this legislation has 30 pages. In Slovakia, it has 80 pages, and somehow it's a complicated way how to adapt those policies, and somehow we need to firstly here in Slovakia to find a way how to simplify those processes, how to become the more flexible, and how to work with the data. That's very important point which Jeff mentioned, and the role of the AmCham in all of this is to make the predictable environment for our businesses, and it was not the situation of the past 3 years, to be honest, and during our pre-political discussion, we had very, very open discussion with the representative of all democratic political parties to really make sure that whoever from those is happening in government, to build a government, then we have the possibility to discuss and to come back to the table and to discuss this predictability of the businesses. And one of those points is also the energy security and resilience, for sure, because it's a huge part of the piece of the daily work which our businesses need to face, taking into consideration the pricing, etc., regulation, and the building other alternative source of the energies, which we know, and Sonia mentioned it, on which level it is right now.
Just little sub-question. What's your assessment, looking into the nearest future from the viewpoint of businesses? How well is Slovak public sector leadership aware of importance of these two topics?
Actually, I don't know yet, to be honest, but I believe that the government is in the position very short time, so it's very difficult to be waiting all for the manifesto of the government. Of course, we try to somehow work with the current government to get the messaging into the manifesto of the government to make sure that all those important topics which were discussed before election will be the part of the action plans, and then also to implementation of those important goals.
The reason why I ask that, in Slovakia we have basically a left-wing government after the September election, so one would, political economists would assume that the topic of keeping jobs will be important. Because as we speak, Germany and France are slipping into the recession, and Eurozone as a whole. following the question of the impact of this terrible, unprovoked war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, I would like to turn our sight to the western part of the continent, from where another macroeconomic danger looms. Starting again with Sonia, how do you assess the readiness of Central and Eastern Europe, Slovakia in particular, to be resilient? How resilient could we be against the economic slowdown that's looming in Germany and the Eurozone, given that these are our key trading partners?
Yes, so I think there are clear examples in Slovakia's history. When the German economy goes down the drain, Slovakia is next. The trade links are very strong. The global value chains, basically both economies are closely integrated in the German V4 industrial cluster. So we probably will see negative effects. You have mentioned before we spoke a fresh study done by Erste that was looking at various economies in the region and their links to the German business cycle. And actually, I was surprised to see that Slovakia wasn't the correlation between the Slovak growth cycle and the German growth cycle wasn't the most intense, but actually it was Czechia, I believe, Slovenia, and Hungary that was closer than Slovakia. But nevertheless, I think we will see impact on the Slovak economy. But I don't think that's the big question, though. To be honest, I think even if Slovakia, it's a business cycle. Even if we see a contraction in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, I think we need to focus our attention to the groundwork, not to the business cycle. So we need to focus our attention to things like industry. What do we do with the Chinese competition? Do we have a strategic vision? How do we have a new innovation strategy as a Slovakia, which I think is a very well-written document. The question is, how do we implement it? Do we manage to implement it? Because we as a country have had a lot of strategies before, and I think it's implementation where it falters usually. We need to focus on things like talent. Slovakia is one of the top countries that is experiencing huge outflows of young people who study abroad that don't come back. So, we have spoken as a part of my work with the Center for International Private Enterprise on actually the future of mobility in Slovakia. We have spoken with various stakeholders in the automotive supply chains. And there are two recurring topics that everyone is concerned about. One was actually energy prices, which is more of a local problem, but another is talent. Companies lack skilled workers, and actually even in the large OEMs have to partner up with NGOs to train their own workers, which is an extra burden for them. And the fact that there isn't an education system in place that raises and trains enough people to cater to the labor market is a huge problem. So I didn't want to steer away from your fundamental question on Western economies, but I think the cyclical factors is the wrong focus. I think it's the structural factors that we should focus on, and very intensely right now, because what we're doing today, we will see the result of that in 10 years.
But what you are saying is that we will manage in those medium-term perspective, or to the contrary, these topics that have been mentioned are actually more significant than short-term economic cycles? Martin, I would like to respond.
Probably in terms of Slovakia particularly, I think there is a good opportunity because the country is having quite a significant amount of the funds, which can help us in this recession period, and it can have impact on our, of course, like inflation and keeping the jobs and focusing on the opportunities with this. However, it will be very important to utilize it the good way. I remember my days in the government where I was responsible for 600 millions which were dedicated to the informatics. We were not very successful with the implementing of those money and placing them into the projects. unfortunately, in 2023, I still find out that some of those projects are still not implemented. And the people were asking, like, if I can help, and I was terrified that, oh my God, it's still not, like, finalized. It's 23, and I was already in the 2 different jobs from that time, so I was quite shocked, yeah. And then looking into nowadays opportunity, I think it is our responsibility to make sure that we are utilizing this 13 millions from the new programming period, and not millions, but billions, yeah, and 6 billions from the plan of the recovery and resilience the right way. And again, like, we are not starting from the scratch. There is a lot of things done already, because those both financial programs were approved by the European Union, so it's clearly stated what we should do through this money. So now it will be very important implementation of those things. And to make sure that in terms of the regulation, again, we are not stopping ourselves as a country, and we are utilizing it. Compare it to the Poland or Hungary, even they do not have the green light from Europe and Brussels on the plan of the resilience and recovery, they are building. They are continue. So what is the plan B for them? That's my question. Like, if the Brussels is not approving those funds for them, are they continue and they're using their local money, or they ask someone from east part of the world for helping them financially?
If I may answer to your question, we switched the roles for a while.
That was just
and speaking of security and resilience, speaking of economic resilience, actually Slovakia is the only of the V4 countries that avoided recession this year. That answers your question. Part of the answer is investments this year. Even though we do see a slowdown in economic growth, just a week ago, we held here the press conference together with the Vienna Institute for Economic Studies, discussing the outlook for the next year. And here I want to point to what Martina has mentioned. One crucial assumption for Slovakia to maintain the resilience in terms of the growth for the upcoming years is effective drawing of the both recovery and resilience plan and the EU funds, which can make a difference. But again, we speak about few percentage points above or below the black zero. Before I touch to other important topics that Sonia has already mentioned, Jeff, your assessment of the resilience of Slovak economy compared to the others in the region, and maybe I'll start also your assessment of these fundamentals being ready or providing the basis for the resilience, namely the labor market. I would consider the personal substrate as the most important prerequisite for sustainable growth, especially in non-manufacturing and higher value-added industries.
In the public-private dialogues that we facilitate all across the region, labor and talent is one of the top issues we hear from business everywhere. We did these fascinating public-private dialogues all across Hungary with entrepreneurs, and like every single one of them wanted to talk about the lack of workforce. And in fact, what's interesting about Hungary, I actually think it's the most interesting country in the European Union today. Well, that's not a normative statement, that's just a fact, because they are really zigging when others are zagging, so to speak. And they're putting a lot of money and effort into getting foreign direct investment. They don't really necessarily have enough people for that. So with the Chinese cattle battery factory that they're very, very proud of, they're going to have to bring in imported labor for these kinds of things. And how that plays out in terms of the government that's the most vocally anti-illegal immigration in the EU is actually one that's having to bring in tens of thousands of workers from outside Europe to fill those jobs. So this is a problem we see everywhere. As someone who went through the immigration process here, even though I'm married to a Slovak, it wasn't easy and it wasn't fun. So I would also say if Slovakia is thinking about moving up the value chain, I know there's a lot of exchanges between Slovakia and Estonia. How do we become the kind of digital, Visegrad for Estonia here? But I think Estonia's, my understanding is at least they have a much more receptive environment to foreign talent in the innovation space. And so that's something we hear this from the Czech Republic as well. The Ministry of Interior is responsible for migration issues because they see it as a security problem, not as an economic issue. So the talent issue is one that's all over the place here. Managing the strategic dependencies on energy is I think, actually reasonably well in hand. And we heard the ambassador talk about the important areas that the U.S. can support this. And then on the China piece, this is the interesting one. Sonia referenced the work that she's doing along with William here from the ADAPT Institute that we're really proud to be part of, looking at the automotive sector, because this is such a big part of the economy, not just for Slovakia, but also for Hungary, Czech Republic, links very much back to Germany, of course, and it links to the future of the automotive sector, right? The talent to be part of the electric vehicle transition, but then will Slovakia be dependent on Chinese batteries for its automotive sector and all the critical minerals that the Chinese dominate, not just in terms of mining, but in terms of the processing? Does anyone have a strategy here for that? Is anyone thinking about that as we think about a green future? Are we just replacing one set of dependencies on sort of OPEC countries and Russia with another one in terms of China? And I think that's the forward-looking question that we're trying to stimulate some conversation around. It's a difficult one for all of our economies that are trying to be part of the green transition. This is the big question mark that we're looking at kind of going forward.
You actually started the next question that was in the line, and that's this China link, but I will add on additional aspect. The big topic in the Trans-Pacific symbiosis, as I used to call it, is so-called decoupling. So eventually, a couple of trends that we are seeing is U.S. economy is holding up better than the Eurozone this year, at least, and also the expectations. Mexico is gradually taking over as one of the biggest exporter into U.S. instead of China. So there is this clear effort to try to decouple from this Trans-Pacific symbiosis. At the same time, in Germany, we have the concept of the Zeitwende and de-risking from China, German companies understanding the risk of this tie dependence. Also when it comes to geopolitical considerations. So to what extent this decoupling, de-risking affects Central and Eastern Europe? Will Central and Eastern Europe be able to afford that? And then the subsequent question, we can answer that all together, is we are sitting in Detroit of Europe, let's be frank. Sonia can give us the statistics on the share of the car exports and car manufacturing on total Slovak economy and industrial production. There is the fifth car manufacturer in construction in Eastern Slovakia. As we speak, luckily that's electric vehicle cars, but at the same time, Jeff has mentioned, Chinese are coming with their own electric vehicle manufacturing facility just across the Danube. So how well equipped are the countries of Central and Eastern Europe for this geostrategic shifts concerning the East?
Yes, so I think one remarkable milestone is the German First China strategy, which I think is the very first in its history. So, I mean, that is just the case in point of this kind of decoupling efforts. And we have seen it also in the region. Czechia has recently published its revised export strategy, where, you know, it also conjugates this decoupling kind of discourse as a part of it. As for Slovakia, I'm not sure we have any strategic document of that kind, but I think it might be coming at some point. Nevertheless, just going to, there has been this concern about the penetration of you know, Chinese EVs to the European markets. It's been even addressed by Ursula von der Leyen, this probe, how it's going to look into this EVs, Chinese EVs with potentially unfair subsidies flooding the EU markets. I think this is partially a result of the fact that Europe pursues an more open trade policy compared to the US, which has a higher duty, and also there is an array of trade barriers that stem from the Inflation Reduction Act as well. But despite this, I think the data speak loud and clear. The penetration of Chinese EVs has doubled, but is still limited in terms of market share. I think it's 9% of EV sales for battery cars and 13% for hybrid sales. I think the only way that Europe can actually fight this or remain competitive vis-a-vis this kind of Chinese EVs is stepping up its own R&D capacities, bringing innovation on par to bring the price down. because it is the case that Chinese electric vehicles are roughly 30% cheaper than EU or US equivalents. And it can also offer edge in terms of whether it's quality, whether it's servicing, whether it's range, things like that. It can also specialize in a niche. And also data speak loud and clear. For example, Global Trade Alert report finds that it is not necessarily like EU consumers don't choose at the present point EV vehicles at the expense of European EVs. So I think this is an important point because that just means that it's a commercial opportunity all across the board. And if OEMs invest sufficiently into R&D and bring the price down, basically any producer that can supply electric vehicles at competitive prices can benefit from this transition as well. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. We have a question from the audience on our live stream, but before we proceed to that, your take, Martina and Jeff, on the readiness of Central and Eastern Europe to deal with this China topic.
Well, I think it's a huge issue for us because from the perspective how we are doing, we are slow, and
We are
slow,
we are slow.
but not just the Central and Eastern Europe, but I mean Europe as such. And you can see it on you just mentioned the level of the businesses, Europe versus US. Now these EVs in the flooding the EU markets, it's visible. Yeah, I was like 2 months ago in Finland, and the driver took me from the airport with beautiful limousine. I was asking, wow, what is this? It's EV from China. Yeah, so in Finland. Yeah, I was surprised, and this is going very quickly. So how to react? Yeah, and we again going to the regulation and the flexibility, how to adapt the regulation, because regulation are important. However, we need to act from also the business's perspective much more flexibly and quickly. And then also it goes to the our generation, how we are supporting R&D, how we are supporting the startup scale-up. If you look what the startup percentage per millions in Slovakia is going, it's going down. Yeah? It's going down in the Slovakia. It's going down in the Eastern Slovakia. So the startups in our geo are not growing; they are shrinking. It's a bad signal. So those are the things we should focus on the education of the labor, using the human capital for the future growth. Like under the umbrella of the MCHEM, we are covering the 37 of the share center in Slovakia. The average of those salary of those people is 2,000 euros, which is like double to the average of the salary. Those are the things where probably we should focus more. It's 40,000 employers, which has a problem to, if they are from the foreigner country, to go to work for Slovakia, as Jeff already mentioned. So those are the things where should we focus our interest in terms of the building the strategy to build this added value jobs in Slovakia, and to provide talents with the good and attractive work. And that's also the plan which we have, for example, as MCHEM, together with our partners, to make sure that we are able to motivate the people from abroad, the Slovak people from abroad, to come back to Slovakia and to work for us. There is already a call out from the plan of the resilience and the development. So definitely those are the ways how to attract the people going back, to get the talent back, to have the more startups, to be able to support our own businesses.
So the policy recommendation from the business would be we need to act, and we need to act quickly.
Quickly.
Jeff,
Quickly.
could you comment on when it comes to this China topic, on this dichotomy, because we have seen recently tensions rising between some of the Baltic states and China, neighboring Czech Republic and China. On the other hand, we have our southern neighbor, which welcomes or seems to welcome investments from that direction. So how this topic will influence the future of the sea, or also economic resilience of the Central and Eastern Europe?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there are I think Martina referenced the fact that there's several gaps that we've seen in the trying to talk to people on this. There's a transatlantic gap where the U.S. has sort of been further ahead and dragging the EU in some ways behind, and the TTC trying to mediate these differences among other fora. Then within Europe, you've got, the French are very sophisticated thinking on this, right? They're very out in front in many ways of Colbertismo, right? They've been probably doing it for 300 years in some ways, but then you get into Central Southeast Europe, try to talk to Romanian and Bulgarian business leaders about de-risking from China. It's just like, it's not really, it's like, what is this? And we got some work on investment screening in Bulgaria, and people are like, no, our government needs to actually focus on investment promotion, right? So there's a gap within the EU, and I think Germany is a key country in all of this, because frankly, the same people that said that they couldn't cut off Russian gas are the same people that say they can't de-risk from China. But not saying that's easy, I'm not being flippant, but it's kind of true. And what's interesting, I find is missing in Central Europe is some sort of conversation, because you talk to people here about geoeconomic risk, and I described that set of indirect demand exposure that runs through Germany to China, right? So a first product is made in part of the German supply chain, and if the Chinese decide they want to punish the Czech Republic because President Pavel, has a phone call with the Taiwanese president, they can punish not just direct Czech products to China, but they can punish Czech products that run through Germany to China. And if you try to talk to the Germans about this, they say, this is kind of not our problem, right? That's their problem. And you talk to business leaders here, and they say, well, Volkswagen's a big foreign investor here. What am I supposed to do about that? The Slovak may run that plant, but that's a German decision, right? German corporate headquarters take that decision. So there seems to be, in the same way that Germany was like a framework nation within NATO, right? It borders a lot of countries, and so there was an effort to link it into its neighbors from a defense industrial perspective. There seems to be some sort of missing geoeconomic conversation between Germany and the Visegrad Four, given the integration of their economies, because the China risk kind of runs through Germany. That's not to pin the tail on Germany in an unfair way, but this seems to be a missing conversation within the region. I'm really curious to see if the Slovaks start to follow the Hungarians. And in 5 to 10 years, will the Hungarians have frankly been proven that this is actually a productive economic relationship for them? And where does that take the future? I think that's why I think the Hungarian bet's so interesting from a U.S. perspective is concerning. But there are contradictions in that model too. So the Hungarians tout all the pluses, but there are the minuses I mentioned as well. So we'll have to see.
I wouldn't want to guess about this following of Hungarian path. I personally hope not. So, but the policy recommendation from our discussion are: we need to act quick, and we need to act in concerted EU-wide manner. Which gets us to the questions from the audience. So I repeat that for our virtual audience, askac.org, askac.org. is the platform for asking the question, and here is the first one. Next November 2024, there are U.S. presidential elections. Polls suggest a Trump victory in swing states. Rumors circulate he wants to put U.S. on standby with NATO or even withdraw. Is there a second Trump presidency? How will this affect transatlantic trade relations and us at the forefront of the, let's put it bluntly, front line with the Eastern war of aggression? Maybe Jeff wants to start?
Well, this is the point where I tell you that SIPE is a nonpartisan institute, and that I really shouldn't, let me take off my SIPE hat and put on my Atlantic Council hat, because I really, SIPE does not comment on these issues. We're an affiliate of the U.S. Chamber. We stay out of the domestic politics. What I actually think is a pity that's missed, I don't know what's going to happen in our elections. It's too far away. I saw that poll. There's a lot of road to be run. We'll have to see. You read the same things I do in the press about the things that may or may not be discussed in the Trump campaign. And you saw the last 4 years of his presidency, so one can kind of deduce where that might go. What's interesting was in the Trump presidency led to large continuity with the Biden administration in terms of keeping the tariffs, in terms of being tough on China. One interesting question is, would Trump have to do some big deal with China, actually? And could he be the person that could deliver some sort of trade deal if it were advantageous? That's an interesting thing to speculate about. What I think is a pity that's missing, in any conversation about economic security, we don't talk about new trade deals. It's like a bad word with the Republicans and the Democrats. And if you want to build economic resiliency and de-risk, you have to have some sort of market access conversation to think about creating those new supply chains for critical minerals or things like that. It's just dead letter. So we talk about TTIP. That was once of the conversation to be had. No one talks about that anymore. And I think I recognize the domestic politics of that are total suicide for both parties. which I just think is a pity because to me it's the other side of the coin in an economic security conversation. And so I'm sidestepping a little bit the domestic politics to say I think it's a pity that in neither party is this part of the conversation because I think it would benefit us tremendously from a resilience perspective.
Yeah, as we need to wind up our discussion, I would like to finish with some, let's hope, optimistic policy recommendations. So, given each three of you would have the political and economic power to implement 2 or 3 strategic principal changes in terms of the policy. Sonia has mentioned the education. Ms. Labeva has mentioned the openness to the migration of qualified labor. But I'm not trying to answer the question for you. Given what we have discussed with regards to the resilience and economic security of the Central and Eastern Europe, which would be like the 2 or 3 most important priorities that policymakers must focus on now and quickly. So let's start with Sonia.
Well, I don't want to repeat myself, but I have already brought up the importance and the prominence of education. And this is an arena where there hasn't been a significant, profound reform, structural reform in the past many decades. And I think the country is suffering greatly because of this. And it's not just industry where we see it very explicitly, but it has basically knock-on effects on anything from financial literacy through civic literacy and engagement, electoral choices, disinformation, hybrid threats. I mean, it's a whole range, plethora of issues where we need to, and I think we should start with early education. We should start with elementary school education. In terms of high school level, there is the prominence of gymnasium, these general schools is too much. Then the industry doesn't have enough talent, specifically suited and educated technical talent with engineering skills to cater to industry. So I think it's a all-encompassing reform that needed to be implemented yesterday. So it's very pressing.
I think this is worth repeating ever and ever again. That's my assessment.
And it's almost like a cliche because we never see any tangible, results. But it's super important.
On that, I think it fits. There's a Slovak proverb: "Repetition is the mother of wisdom," and we need to repeat. Education is the priority. Martina, would you like to add?
Just
on
a
that?
joke. When I visited once Ministry of Education with my daughter, she was asking, "Is it Ministry of Magic?" From the harem. So probably it would help. Yeah?
Because of the spider webs.
So the priority to build a data society definitely, and to simplify the administration and probably to make it a little bit smaller would help.
Which is recommendation regarding the fiscal consolidation.
Yes, and then
cut the debt rate.
Yeah, and then definitely to support the providing the funds directly to the SMB and businesses. And the third recommendation would be to support the region with those finances and to give them the power, financial, and probably the legislative to do the things in the region to support the region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jeff. Your 2 most pressing recommendations
from an economic security perspective. I think it would be interesting for the government to to really try to work with businesses through its chambers to educate business on the risks, the real risks that are out there and the dependencies. Because if you look at the geopolitical situation today, it just feels like it's crisis after crisis after crisis, including things that we ruled out. And God forbid there is some sort of crisis in East Asia. Map out, do the stress tests that the Germans thought they were going to do. Remember in the China strategy, they didn't want to do the stress tests for their industry. Could you do something like that discreetly here behind closed doors and share that data, to start to share data and have some sort of exchange to educate business and find out what their concerns and their fears are? I think that would be one thing. And then try to integrate that a little bit more into the wider Visegrad region, because I don't think you can have these siloed conversations. So those would be my priorities on the economic security front.
That was Jeffrey Lightfoot, Martina Slabejová, and Sonia Muzikářová. Please join me in thanking them for this very insightful conversation. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you, Ambassador Rana, Ambassador Fried, for joining us today. And let's proceed with next steps of your agenda, as I'm being alerted that we need to be sharp on time. We need to be German today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.